funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation and viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, it's legal. We'll explore how the state should grow its recreational cannabis industry.
They listen to the individuals who tell them these are opportunities and industries that can make a difference in so many ways.
And an award-winning career spent looking at the science of the past to better inform the future. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. We have a fascinating interview coming up with historical astronomer William Donohue. He spent his career studying the golden age of astronomy and recently was honored by the American Astronomical Society. The Line Opinion Panel examines the troubling practice of encrypting and deleting official records at the Children, Youth, and Families Department, along with its political implications. The group also talks about why more parents are choosing homeschool coming out of the pandemic. We start with New Mexico's new cannabis law. Here's the line. It was an effort decades in the making, but cannabis is now officially a legal substance in New Mexico. You still can't smoke it in public places, but it's no longer a crime to have under 2 ounces on your possession as long as you're over the age of 21. And New Mexicans can now grow up to 12 plants at home without a permit if you live alone, as long as you are not selling it. Now, the Cannabis Regulation Act became the official law of the land on Tuesday, but questions about how the industry will run in New Mexico are far from answered. Here to discuss all of this week's virtual Line Opinion Panel. We thank them all for their preparation for this week's show. Starting with regular and attorney Sophie Martin. We also welcome back to the show Merritt Allen of Vox Optima Public Relations. And we bring back Dan McKay, Capitol Bureau reporter for the Albuquerque Journal. Welcome to you all. Now, there's a lot of excitement in the air, about this development and the potential economic impact, especially of this new industry, but it's a complicated issue still. And as we talk about a lot on this show, we don't know yet what some of the unintended consequences may be. And Merritt, will this be a day we all look back on in 20, 30 years as a major landmark for New Mexico? Is it that big?
Well, today isn't. I don't think. I think we have a long way to go. I think we've got a lot of murk to work through. And it was a shame because this time last year, I think we knew what was coming up. We knew what was coming up in the legislature. And so by the time draft legislation got to the specials, to this regular session, it wasn't ready. It didn't pass. We glommed together a special session. The legislation wasn't great. As you led in, if you happen to magically have marijuana in your possession right now, that's okay. But we have no real clear path forward about how that marijuana comes to be in your possession. So we also have a tremendous amount of dependence on federal jobs, which are also, you can't have a federal job and be using marijuana. You can't have a security clearance and be using marijuana. So I think perhaps July 1st, 2022 could be a big day, but not today.
I hear you, though. Quick point, though. Colorado does have a pretty massive federal presence, and they're sort of working their way through it as well as we are. Dan McKay, official cannabis sales won't happen until next year, April 1st, as we know, but there's still a lot to figure out before then. The Regulation and Licensing Division is working right now on rules for producers, promulgating those things, who needs to get growing sooner rather than later, all that kind of stuff. Those rules have to be finalized by September 1st, which is like the day after tomorrow in time when you're rulemaking. How feasible is that timeline? Are we rushing this, or are we dragging our feet? What's your sense of it as you watch this?
Yeah, there are people on both sides of the issue who feel like this is not happening as fast as it should. In some states they've done marijuana legalization through ballot measures, and that gives regulators very little time to prepare for it. In this case, you're seeing both the state and local governments scrambling to figure out how to prepare for this. One of the key debates that I'll be watching is how cities and counties deal with cannabis regulations. They cannot opt out entirely, but they can set reasonable rules on where these businesses may operate and that kind of thing. And that's going to raise some questions about do you want cannabis stores in a downtown or historic area, that sort of thing. So we're going to see a debate all across the state, not just in Santa Fe.
Sophie, interestingly, regulation and licensing has been collecting public comment on this for a while. And, Superintendent Linda Trujillo says they're going to make it. They're going to make this September thing, but there's still a lot of confusion and concern from people who want to get in the business. That's the big problem here. How does the state and the RLD handle the need to educate the community while also coming up with those rules at such a fast pace? I mean, you're talking about, I can count about 4 major balls in the air these folks are trying to juggle now.
It does feel like there's a certain cart before the horse element to this.
Yes.
It's not like we didn't know as a state that these issues were coming up, that deadlines were coming up, and that people were going to need to know. And what unfortunately I think happens is that in the absence of information, it's the already established businesses that are in the best position.
That's right.
I mean, I don't know, I'm not taking a side here, but that are in the best position to move forward. Whereas the folks who are hoping to enter the business are scrambling for detail. And I think it's especially notable, for instance, that the city of Santa Fe has said, yeah, we're working on it, but they seem pretty far behind in the conversation, as opposed to some of the other communities here. And that's going to be a big market there in Santa Fe. So that's a debate. Those are details that they really need to nail down.
Merritt, pick up on what Sophie said, but in this regard, micro businesses, of course, is a big part of the conversation. The equity issue mentioned over and over by sponsors of the Cannabis Regulation Act. I mean, Sophie just laid out a pretty clear thing. If you've got money now, you can get real estate, you can get in the game. I mean, what's the impact, for the sponsors, what they envisioned? Is it working out the way they envisioned at this point?
I think that simply by making the cost for a license $2,500, that's not enough to make ease of entry equal for all. And so, no, not enough time has been spent. And that's what just makes me so frustrated. Everyone knew this was coming up in the 2021 session. There was a panel created to look at this, and the legislation that went forward was just thrown together at the last minute. So either this is going to be free market capitalism or it's not.
Interesting.
And I think what we're saying is it's going to be free market capitalism. And to use a cliche, it is what it is.
You can see the forces forming. It's a difficulty. And Dan, last question. We got a jet for another topic here. What are you going to be watching for as the industry in licensing and rule creation moves forward? Anything particular you're looking for?
A lot of legislators are really interested in equity and who ends up dominating the market, whether bigger out-of-state corporations come in and have sort of the initial capital and investment to be able to start and get businesses going, or if local entrepreneurs are going to be able to compete as well. So I think there probably will be further legislation that looks at some of those, that tries to promote local entrepreneurs or smaller businesses, and we'll have to see how that plays out.
And once things are established, it's awfully hard to roll back or fix, that's for sure. We want to continue the conversation now about cannabis in New Mexico. Of course, state officials will be leaning heavily on other states that have already legalized to identify best practices, but what does the research say about how to effectively establish and run a recreational use cannabis industry? That's a question the Growing Forward team has been researching as they gather information and interviews for a new season of the award-winning podcast. Co-hosts Megan Kemrick and Andy Lyman of New Mexico Political Report recently talked to Adam Levin of the Pew Research Center to find out what the numbers say and what lessons New Mexico can learn in these early days.
Adam, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Megan. It's good to be here.
And so Pew has looked at the issue of so-called sin taxes for state budgets like alcohol, tobacco, and then followed up with studies on how recreational marijuana sales fit into those analyses. So first, let me ask, it's really tempting to raise taxes on things like alcohol and tobacco products, and a lot of states have done that. But what's interesting is usually they're raising money for public health programs, which, if successful, would actually help curtail consumption of these products and thus reduce the revenue from sin taxes. So how are these kinds of taxes problematic for state budgets?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I do think, like you were saying, sort of from a policymaker's perspective, there can be at least competing goals, curtailing the use or increasing revenue, and so there's sort of a balance that needs to be struck there. And state policymakers need to decide if they're doing this for public health reasons or for budgetary reasons. When you're talking about other sin taxes like alcohol, tobacco, some of the issues from a fiscal perspective are that to keep the revenue increasing year after year, for the way those goods are taxed, you either have to continue to increase the tax rate or you have to have increased consumption. Which, going back to what we were saying earlier, both of those have or can have, depending on the policymaker's perspective, can have negative consequences or are undesirable on their own. So those are sort of the issues with your traditional sin taxes like tobacco, like alcohol, from a budgeting perspective.
And how does is it fair to compare these kind of legacy sin taxes to cannabis? What are some significant differences?
Well, I think there are a few differences. I mean, first of all, when you're talking about tobacco use is in a long-term decline. That's another reason why to continue getting revenue, you have to either increase the rate or rely on increased use, but it has been in long-term decline. Marijuana, it's hard to measure at this point, but it doesn't necessarily appear to be on the same path. I think it's also interesting because going back to the public health versus revenue question, when you're looking at recreational marijuana, in many states, it's been passed by referendum. I know in New Mexico's case, it was passed by legislation, but in many states, it was passed by referendum. So, it's sort of the public saying we want this, as opposed to policymakers saying we want to do this, or we don't want to do this, or we want to have these goals. That sort of thing. There are some differences in taxation. Marijuana has a variety of ways that it can be taxed. That it can be taxed, and that states do tax it either on the value, or on the weight, or on the potency. So those are sort of a variety of different ways which it could be taxed, and tobacco is usually just taxed on the price on a per pack basis. There's not a lot of variation in how it can be taxed. So those are some of the differences when you're talking about, what you call legacy sin taxes versus recreational marijuana.
At least one of the models that we had heard about, I think as late as or as early as last year, said that they took into consideration illicit sales in a post-legalization world, meaning that they assume some people are still going to be using or purchasing through illicit markets. Do we know what kind of impact those illicit markets have on other states as far as the sales go? You mentioned California. I wonder if that was part of the issue, that people already had a way to get it before it was legalized.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a big consideration in all of this. Converting from the black to the legal market is one of the things that revenue forecasters really have to think about, because that's ultimately going to have a huge impact on how big the market is and how much sales and revenue states take in. It's complicated. There's not really a great way to do it. One of the things that states have done generally since recreational marijuana has started cropping up in states is learning from other states and from other forecasters, and seeing what has happened in their states. So looking at states like Colorado and Washington. When you're talking about the black market, recreational marijuana does tend to be a little bit more expensive than it is on the black market. And that's because it's licensed, it's tested, and then it's taxed. So one of the things that policymakers have been thinking about is where to sort of set that tax rate so that they can coax people from the black market to the legal market, which is obviously a goal of legalizing recreational marijuana for all these states. So it's definitely, it's a tricky issue, and I think it's something that states are still wrestling with.
You touch in your research on some of the bumps and delays other states encountered as they ramped up legal recreational infrastructure. We are in the process of that now with our state agency promulgating rules and regulations. Can you talk about how some of those sort of delays impacted the revenue forecasts and the revenue and how they've had to adjust?
Yeah. So in at least a couple of states, I think Oregon and California are the most prominent examples that I could think of. It took a while, it took longer than expected for the market to get up and running, for stores to be opening. And as a result, forecasters, that wasn't something that they had anticipated. And so to start, that was probably a contributing factor to why revenue that was collected was below what was forecasted. I think that in Oregon, at least, I think that has pretty much smoothed itself out. I think California may still be going through that a little bit. But, I think it was partly because I know in Oregon, they had way more applicants to grow and I think to sell than they were anticipating. So there was a bottleneck processing that. California, I believe, has some more local regulations that localities could at least put into place. And that was something that led to the market being a little bit delayed. So there are different reasons, but it's definitely something that states have seen.
So given how this has played out elsewhere, how should policymakers in New Mexico consider the potential revenue from recreational cannabis as they decide where to allot it or what to do with it? Because it sounds like from your research, you shouldn't count on this as like a stable form of revenue every year.
Yeah, that's right. So first of all, I think it's important to remember that we're talking overall about a very small percentage of total revenue. So in Colorado, for example, in fiscal year 20, they collected about $330 million in recreational marijuana taxes, which sounds like a lot, but their total budget is somewhere in the $30 billion range. So percentage-wise, it's a very small number, and that holds across all states. The other thing, like you were saying, Megan, is that policymakers, it's unpredictable, the revenue, because it's hard to forecast, and for all these other reasons that we've been talking about. So policymakers should just be cautious with budgeting the money. So that could mean putting it towards savings. That could mean putting it towards one-time spending as opposed to recurring spending that needs a steady source of revenue every year. Because you're not sure how much you're going to get from recreational marijuana, it might be better to put it towards a one-time use, such as building a piece of infrastructure, something where it doesn't need a steady stream of revenue every year.
Some of the issues, are kind of big picture issues for government, how we spend money, how we communicate in the context of open records and things like that.
What can science, a field that's constantly moving forward, learn from looking at its past? William Donahue of St. John's College in Santa Fe thinks it can learn an awful lot. He's a historical astronomer who recently won the American Astronomical Society's Doggett Prize. It's a career-spanning award, and for Mr. Donahue, that means decades spent studying and translating important works from the scientific revolution, a period when everything changed about how we consider the sky above. As NMF senior producer Matt Grubbs found out, Mr. Donahue discovered much about how great minds like Johannes Kepler reconsidered the solar system and the universe.
Bill Donahue, thanks so much for taking time to talk with us today.
My pleasure.
The idea of historical astronomy, what is it that we can learn by studying past scientific and astronomical discoveries?
Ancient Greeks were mathematizing the heavens in like the 4th century BC. Ptolemy had created, first of all, he had this very interesting preface, which was very modern, and was saying that we know something about where we see the planets and stars going. We're not really entitled to know anything else about that. That's all kind of speculation, it's theology. So what the job of astronomy is to create a mathematical model that will predict the things that we can see, which is really very modern. There are a lot of modern, like 20th century scientists like Dirac, who really said about the same thing. In a very simplified way, by studying those old astronomers, you can see how that approach developed, and you can include that in a curriculum that ordinary undergraduates can do, unlike a lot of quantum stuff, which involves a lot of complicated mathematics. So that's That's one side of it. And then another is that naturally there were people who came along and said, you know, I think we can actually learn more stuff about the stars than just creating mathematical models. Kepler was one of those, and his advances in astronomy were a huge, he set the research pattern for the next 100 years by saying, look, we believe that the Earth is one of the planets, so the planets must be like the Earth. So the job of the astronomer now, planetary astronomer, is to figure out how these things really are moving as physical objects. And that means we're going to have to deal with forces, and that means we're going to have to mathematize forces. Nobody had ever done that before, so he was just kind of making up a system. But you can see how he set the scene for Newton.
And up until this point in human history, the assumption, there were all sorts of assumptions, but one of the big ones was that orbits are circular. And it wasn't until 50 years earlier than that we thought, oh, well, the Earth is at the center of everything because we are at the center of everything. What a fascinating period of time, I think, for someone to study.
It was exciting. And interestingly, Kepler, I think, was just about the first of the second generation Copernicans. That is, his teacher, although his teacher taught Ptolemaic astronomy, he was privately a follower of Copernicus. And outside of class, he taught Kepler, he helped Kepler read Copernicus. So Kepler had a leg up on this. He already, practically as a kid as a freshman in college was studying Copernicus, and so he was a jump ahead of everybody else and thinking, what are the consequences of making the Earth into a planet? Then all these planets are like Earth, and what then? So,
how long did it take for this to sort of become accepted?
It was about 50 years. Descartes was really big. Galileo was big. Kepler was he didn't have such a popular following, but what he did was he set the research program for the next 100 years by saying, look, if the Earth is a planet moving around the sun, then the planets must be like Earth. So we've got a whole different kind of challenge in our physics. We need to be able, we know on Earth that things move because they get pushed and pulled. And it's not moving because they are made out of some magic substance that flies around in the sky. So we need to base our celestial physics, our explanations of planetary motion, on physical causes, which means you have to mathematize forces. And nobody really knew how to do that. Kepler didn't know how to do it either. He started making things up. He said, well, maybe it's kind of like the way a magnet works. And so he had this whole theory involving magnets. But even as he was working out the theory, he was saying, there's some places where this theory just doesn't work, and I don't know how to fix it. So, and then he says, okay, so it's up to you guys out there who are reading this to figure it out. And Newton was one of those guys.
It changes everything. The study of historical astronomy and the translation work that you've done is something that fit into your career at St. John's, which is a great books institution. For people who aren't familiar with that, can you explain a little bit about the course of study and how your work and historical astronomy in general sort of fits into this?
Many scientists think you're not going to learn anything by reading old science. It may be entertaining, it may be interesting, but you're going to get wrong facts, and their approach is, what we're trying to do is to get more and more accurate explanation of things. There are other people who think the job of science is not to find out the facts, but to try to come up with a way of understanding the universe. And facts are a part of that, but having the understanding is. is a huge dimension of that. And so in studying old sciences, which is what we do at St. John's, we study old sciences. In chemistry, we redo experiments that were done hundreds of years ago. We look at the old observations in astronomy and try to understand what these astronomers were thinking. We are, in a way, looking over the shoulder of a really, really smart person, confronting questions that nobody had ever confronted before. And we can see how they went about understanding those things. When you're dealing with a modern scientific question, you're confronting something that nobody's ever seen before. So you've got the job of figuring this out. Now, if you've never done that before, you're not going to be in as good a position as somebody who has gone back and looked at how Newton figured things out, how Kepler figures things out, how Lavoisier figured things out in chemistry. You will approach modern problems by saying, you know, I've been through this a lot of times with a lot of really smart teachers.
At some point during your translation, you discovered that Kepler was sort of working backwards. He anticipated that people might not agree with this, and he wanted his case to be as solid as it could. This is sort of the discovery that a lot of people, the New York Times picked up on it, that sort of thing. Tell me about that, and how did you sort of realize, wait a second, this isn't doing what he says it's doing?
Well, it was just one chapter in Astronomia Nova. Towards the end, he had already done the major spade work in establishing what the general shape of Mars's orbit was, and how the forces had to work in order to create that shape. I could see from working through repeating his computations that he couldn't have done it the way he said he had done it. It must have been just a horrible mess as he was going through and fiddling with this number and fiddling with that number. And he came up with this final table, which was very neat and nice, and had all these positions of Mars laid out in a very orderly fashion. And I was wondering, how did he come up with, and I couldn't get them to come out until I took his finished theory that he worked out. So I realized he took his finished theory and put it in there. And I think what he was thinking was, if I had been able to do the computations that I was working on here, and if I could have done them all perfectly, I would have come out with all of these positions, because I know that these positions are the right ones because of the relation. Because it's a complicated thing. It would not be regarded as legitimate science nowadays. But you have to remember that this is 1604 or something around there, and you have to cut him some slack.
What about that time attracted your attention, and what about these works?
There was just a huge change that happened then. Giordano Bruno executed in 1600. He was a proponent of an infinite universe with the stars being possibly centers of other planetary systems, and so a very modern looking thing. He also had some very crazy ideas, like he was trying to convince the Pope that the Pope should abolish the Christian religion and go back to ancient Egyptian religion and all kinds of stuff like that. So it was understandable that he would have been tried for heresy and burned. But still, because Bruno was associated with those ideas, it was not regarded as all right to think that way, at least for the next decade or two. But you couldn't really suppress that kind of thinking once it was out of the box. By 1650, people were saying, this idea of Earth in the middle and the universe as a ball, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. We need to be thinking in terms of spreading things out and just trying to investigate the universe as we see it and not the universe as we imagine it. So in a period of 50 years, the whole universe changes. It's now reasonable to think of an indefinitely large universe. And what I figured out in studying this, I did my dissertation on it, was that the real impetus behind that had nothing to do with new phenomena or anything like that. It had to do with theology, largely.
Interesting. And you had said that a lot of this work is taking place in religious settings, whether it's seminary or a religious university.
At the same time, the 30 Years' War was going on. You had the Jesuit college movement. I think by 1650, there were something like 500 Jesuit colleges set up around Europe. So there were Jesuit colleges all over the place, and there were alternate educational movements going on that were often theologically based. And the Protestants had their own side on things, but they were by no means radicals. In fact, sometimes the Catholics were, like Descartes was educated in a Jesuit college. And a lot of the early Cartesians have that kind of background.
Okay. Is that the reason that people like Kepler worried that they would get in trouble for the way that they were thinking, or that there would be some sort of pushback? Obviously, they had seen what happened to Bruno.
Seen what happened to Bruno, and they had seen a little later what happened to Galileo, which was not as drastic, but he was under house arrest. It was just radically different.
Did all these scientists know of each other and know of the work that they were doing?
Galileo and Kepler kept an eye on each other. Galileo was more standoffish, I think because Galileo didn't really understand astronomy very well. He was, which sounds like a strange thing to say, the inventor of the telescope does not understand astronomy. But he was not able to accept Kepler's idea that the paths of the celestial bodies were not circular, and that you had to be constructing a mathematical theory of forces in order to make them work. He just couldn't wrap his mind around that. Kepler kept on writing to Galileo saying, you ought to do this and you ought to do that, and then he wanted to talk to you about so and so, and Galileo would keep on not writing back.
Unless he liked what he heard or read.
Oh yeah. Well, when Galileo needed help, people with good credentials to look at his new telescope, then he would write to Kepler saying, I sent a telescope over to Prague, and I hope you will get a chance to look at it. And then Kepler was able to say, yeah, this thing really works.
When you found out that you were winning the award, or now, as you think about it, what does it mean to you to have that recognition?
I was astonished that they would consider me, because it's usually to established academics, other people with distinguished academic careers, and I have had a very atypical career. I've never received tenure from anybody.
But like you said, it's that chance really, as you're going through Kepler's journals, to be in his head or over his shoulder.
Yes.
Seeing what he saw and thought.
It is, and unfortunately, it's not really so much what is current in history of science. But still, I think and I think a lot of people agree with this, that there's room for people who are really just wanting to study the ideas and understand how those ideas develop and how they make sense. And maybe even to try to help students get an appreciation for that process, because that seems to me to be one of the very best ways to learn science, is to be an apprentice to somebody like Kepler or Galileo or Lavoisier or whatever.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for taking all the time. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for doing this.
There's no doubt the last 16 months have taken a toll on New Mexico's public schools. Virtual and hybrid learning has pushed educators, students, and families to the edge, and there are still a lot of unanswered questions about what next school year will look like in terms of mask wearing or extended learning opportunities. Another impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is a dramatic increase in homeschooling in the state. According to the Public Education Department, the number of students that made the switch to homeschooling nearly doubled, and that shift could cost the Albuquerque School District more than $50 million. Now, Sophie, do you expect this trend to continue in New Mexico? Is this a blip, or once the pandemic is completely over, will those students just head back to public school? How do you read this?
Well, I mean, I think it's a complex issue, and it's worth noting it's a national issue. It's not just happening in New Mexico.
Good point.
And there's a lot that goes into these decisions. For instance, will parents still be able to work from home? What will be the status of unemployment payments? Can you afford to stay home and homeschool? What programs, will continue to be available? I think that's probably the most stable of these issues is that there is quite a bit of programming available for kids who are homeschooling. But all of these things are going to come into play. One of the things we know about this pandemic period is that it's been especially hard on women, that women have had to bear, a disproportionate cost in terms of caring for children, homeschooling, et cetera. And so each household's got to be making its own decision about, can it afford to do it? What are the benefits to doing it? And certainly we do here. I remember actually about a year ago, I sat on this panel and said, I think there are going to be students who find that learning from home is better for them. And that is part of what we're hearing now too. I think I sounded like I was out of touch back then, but we were already hearing a year ago that some kids are doing better at home. And that's part of what we're seeing in this discussion. The impact though on the school systems with so many fixed costs that they will have difficulty shedding as their funding formula means that they get less money. That's going to be, I think, a crisis for education across the country and in New Mexico in the coming years.
I want to circle back to that. That's a very good point there. Dan, is part of the fact of this the fact that parents and family members, they were just simply more involved in their own students' education out of necessity, as Sophie just mentioned? But now it seems to me the PED has a sales job to convince these families to come back to the public classroom going forward and actually make the case to these parents that it's better for their kids to come back to the classroom. This is going to be kind of an interesting discussion over the summer.
Yeah, no doubt. There are also some broader demographic changes that are affecting, the number of school-age children in New Mexico has been dropping in general, and so I think this homeschooling trend is contributing to that. And I think you're right that public schools do have to persuade these families that it's safe to come back, that it's effective to come back. And it could be that some of these families decide that, homeschooling was the right choice and they want to continue doing it. But there are certainly some interesting trends that are going to force New Mexico to rethink some of its education efforts.
Yeah. Merritt, it's this double-edged sword here for public schools. They get funding from the state on a per-student basis, as Sophie mentioned. That's another tough pill to swallow for districts. But the state does have some federal COVID relief money to cover them in the short run. But is this the time to make some adjustments moving forward? Is this little window we have when we have some federal money coming in?
Absolutely, and that's exactly what I wanted to talk about is the pandemic was the right time for a reset for PED, for APS, because we've seen over decades the way we are doing things is not working. We look at our numbers, any numbers, we change, and every administration, we change the numbers we're looking at, whatever. We're at the bottom of every list. And more parents, when faced with a choice, are walking. And it's not the same types of parents. What all the numbers are showing, homeschool families have traditionally been largely white. That's changed. And especially homeschooling communities have grown up along cultural or ethnic lines. And particularly with our challenges with broadband and trying to connect remotely, homeschooling can seem a lot easier if you can get a curriculum it's a lot simpler to teach your children yourself. It gives you the flexibility. You don't have to be regimented against a specific school day. You can work it in with your work. So there are a lot of issues on the school homeschooling front. But if you look at just how New Mexico organizes its school districts, having 89 school districts for the number of students we have, and then a third of them in one mega school district.
Right.
That makes no blasted sense. So I think this is a great opportunity to take, to your point, to take that money and really do a reset and figure out what is best for our children, because we've not been serving them. And it's not just a problem that this PED has created. It's one that's been inherited and building and snowballing over decades.
Good points there. Good. Some interesting stuff to think about there. Hey, Sophie, though, how does the revelation about the major increase in the number of homeschool students, here's my question, how does it affect the big education issue that hangs over everything? And I'm talking about the Yazzie Martinez trial, which found the state, of course, was not providing an equal education for all New Mexico students. All right, and those with resources that you and Merritt and Dan are talking about might have the luxury to do some homeschooling, but more vulnerable New Mexico students don't have that choice. Do you think this will actually widen the education gap over the long haul?
It very well could. And I think that one thing that we haven't really touched on here that is of concern as well is the number of students who have sort of disappeared. And those where we don't know necessarily that they're being homeschooled, they may have moved out of state, but it may be a situation in which they can't access schooling. And so, we were also going to be looking at, have children fallen behind?
Right.
Those who have been educated and those who haven't. But that is a really interesting issue, the question of Yazzie. Certainly as funding formulas force what looks like it's going to be a decrease in funds available to the school systems, they're going to have to make some hard decisions, and Yazzie's going to be hanging over all of that. Yeah.
Hey, Dan, education has become so politicized. It just, the battle over teaching critical race theory in K through 12, is it, it's one of those hard opinion questions, but is this just a way for families that don't believe in certain approaches to just skirt these things all together and just say, the hell with it, I'm doing homeschooling? Is that part of this, that there's something political motivating some of these folks?
Yeah, it's hard to tease out sort of the politics from other kinds of, philosophical debates over education. So it's a little difficult to decide what, what is driving the homeschool increase. But, I think that the pandemic is probably the driving factor at this point, the disruption to in-person schooling. I have to imagine that's the overriding factor at this point. And, the other things may be lesser factors, but present as well.
Hey, Dan, I want to stay with you on Yazzie Martinez as well. I want to get your sense of this. Obviously, this puts a lot of the funding formulas in a bit of a disarray here. Again, I'm asking your sense of this. How does Yazzie Martinez get affected by this bump in homeschooling here in your view?
Well, I think one of the key issues and you touched on it, is the availability of broadband and electronic devices, the material you need to do adequate homeschooling or remote schooling. New Mexico lags the nation in broadband availability. There are many, many families that just simply don't have internet or high-speed internet available, or paying for it. So I think that we're at kind of this time of tremendous disruption in the education system, and there's going to be a lot of debate over how best to fix it, whether it's new resources or new strategies or what.
Merritt, I want you to touch on the Yazzie thing as well. I mean, it is what it is, as you said a little bit ago on another subject, but there are things that have to be put in place. There's just not an option here. Does this throw a monkey wrench into the whole thing?
Well, and I think to Sophie's point, when we can't find some of the most underserved students because they've disappeared from the school system, it certainly doesn't make it that much harder. So we have that issue. To Dan's point, that the remote access and the broadband issues, the tools that children really need to learn. I think learning without internet or without a laptop or tablet is going to put children further and further behind. And as this progresses farther, and we're not catching up, those children, this gap is going to become wider. So the longer we wait, the harder it's going to be to become fully compliant. And the pandemic certainly did not help us. One point I just want to point out,
if you could. Mm-hmm.
It's a little tangential, but one thing about the rise of homeschooling, quite typically, the homeschooler is the female parent. And we've already seen women dropping out of the workforce, and this trend is going to continue to keep women out of the workforce. And I just wanted to throw that out. That's going to be something that is a generational gap. I think that we see for the next generation is the pandemic, the COVID-19 women in the workforce drop.
Gotcha.
And it did tie to homeschooling.
Gotcha. Good points there. Glad you got them in. Keep up with this conversation on our Facebook page and let us know what you think about the rise in homeschooling. Up next here with The Line, are the scandals reaching a boiling point for Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham as she heads into re-election? You can reach out to us anytime on social media and join the conversation. We're at NM in Focus on Facebook and Twitter, and find episodes and web extras at our website, newmexicoinfocus.org. A whistleblower lawsuit over the use of a private messaging system in the Children, Youth, and Families Department, a restructuring of the Department of Workforce Solutions after millions in unemployment overpayments, and accusations from Republican lawmakers of secret meetings on how to spend over $1.5 billion of federal COVID relief funds. The honeymoon is definitely over for the governor as she stares down a re-election bid next year. The questions and criticisms may be rising, but Dan, how vulnerable is she really headed into the midterms when you think about the entire record?
Well, it's difficult to say. She has had reasonably high approval ratings as recently as last year, the last time the Journal did a scientific poll.
Right.
But there are also going to be some broader political trends that may present a challenge. Typically the party that is not in the White House loses ground at in other parts of government at midterm elections. So that's something that could favor Republicans next year. But we'll have to see. New Mexico's been a pretty blue state in the last few election cycles. So, and we're not sure yet who the Republican nominee will be.
Sophie, every administration has issues, troubles, is part of the game. As things go along, you get sideways with certain constituencies. It just happens. But does this growing list of questionable things give you or others some pause here? Can this just be chalked up to dealing with COVID-19 for 16 months and we should just sort of look at it through that lens?
I don't know that I would be that sort of, let's move along about it. Some of the issues, are kind of big picture issues for government, how we spend money, how we communicate in the context of open records and things like that. And those are not just this moment in time. Those are issues that need to be addressed longer term. I mean, certainly to your point, governments are complex creatures.
Yep.
And we have a tendency to sort of point and say, well, that's all on the governor. And on some level, yeah, the buck stops there. But also they're just complicated beings and difficult to control.
Merritt, we've got an issue with CYFD. It seems there's an issue for every sitting governor, but this one in particular over transparency and the use of, certain kinds of messaging out there. If you could briefly kind of give us just in a minute or so what's going on there and your sense of where the governor stands on this issue.
Well, two very senior level employees recruited from out of state to come help make CYFD better attempted to do so. We're told to stop doing so when they pushed forward and said, no, this is really what you asked us to do. After 6 months, and in one case, less than 6 months, we're fired. And what was noted, this is Cliff and Deborah Gilmore, and they've gone public and filed a lawsuit. And it was noted by Cliff Gilmore, our firing was the most competent, coordinated effort that CYFD made in our tenure with the agency. And it was over deleting a requirement to delete all text messages within 24 hours. It was a no bid contract for a $4.5 million software package and installation. It was a hiring process that was clearly to favor a certain candidate over others and not on the merits of credentials. And if it's happening at that high a level, God only knows what's happening at the caseworker level. And so this is really blowing up CYFD. And when you look at New Mexico, our state budget in general, without the ridiculous amounts of federal money pouring in, our budget is between $6 and $7 billion. And compared with other states, that's not a lot. And the way our state is structured, most of the power is in the executive branch, and the legislature gave more of that power to the executive branch under the Richardson administration. But truly, it's not a big ask for a governor to operate competently and expect the agencies under the governor's purview to operate competently. And we do not do that.
Let me ask Sophie a question on this, this regarding the deleting of text messages and voicemails. I'm looking at the guidance from the administration under text messages, and it says this, quote, every single text message that you send or receive likely qualifies as a transitory record. And what that means is messages, they don't convey information of temporary importance in lieu of oral communications. There's something very confusing about that. I mean, we want to have transparency, we want these records saved, but the guidance from the administration itself says, no, you don't have to save these text messages.
I think the challenge here in terms of the open records laws, IPRA in New Mexico, is that it's not the mode of communication or the mode of recording, for lack of a better way to put it, that should be guiding whether a particular communication is subject to open records and therefore must be preserved.
Right.
It's the content. And so these inquiries really need to be fact-based. Is it, do you have to keep "I'm leaving for lunch now" in a text message? Well, I mean, according to that guidance, it sounds like no. And my understanding as well is no, that's not a public record from given the intent of the law. If you chose, and we've seen this happen, not just in this administration, right? But if you chose to put substantive information that if it was in another media would need to be preserved, if you chose to use Signal or another messaging app, Slack, if you chose to use text message in order to circumvent the requirement that a communication or a recording needs to be preserved, that's a different matter, and that is problematic.
It's also how caseworkers often have to reach their managers in, kind of crisis times on, I need permission, I need you to know I need to remove this child. Are you okay with this?
Interesting. And that would qualify in your view as a text that should be saved or not saved? Is that just the standard course of business? I mean, again, I'm trying to get to what should be saved here and what shouldn't merit. Is that?
I feel if we are removing a child from a home that is dangerous and that child somehow comes to harm and there is an investigation or perhaps a lawsuit, I feel like this would be evidence.
Right.
So, yeah, I think that should be saved.
Interesting points there. That'll have to do it for the line this week, unfortunately. Thanks again to all of our panelists. I want to thank Ed Williams from Searchlight as well for his reporting on this issue. Thanks again to the panelists. I'm back in a moment with a few final thoughts. How funny was that weather swap we just enjoyed with the northwest part of the country this week? If you had told me on Father's Day past I'd soon be enjoying a walk in a drizzling high 60s rain like it was on Wednesday, all I could have done was laugh and hoped. This roller coaster of weather, if anything, signals that this climate change thing is going to be a ride for us here in New Mexico. The whiplash felt something akin to a warning. Let's not let this blessed monsoon wash away the memory of that heat bubble we suffered under previously. and what sustained temps like that would mean for our future on a number of fronts, it's not pretty. Agriculture, livestock, how we recreate, how we work, architecture, walkability, it's all going to morph over time. The question is, do we get in front of this hotter future with thoughtful long-game policy decisions, or do we wait for the hammer to drop fully? What we can do right now is enjoy the lovely cool weather this weekend, because it won't last, summer being what it is. Thanks again for joining us and for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the McCune Charitable Foundation and viewers like you.